This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masterengencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Welcome, everyone. My name's Larry Bailey with Mortgage Workflow Partners. You're here today because it's Tuesday, 4 o'clock Eastern. We get together as a community with the Mastering Encompass community. And we get together for an hour. These are workshop formats for 2025. If you're used to these being a half an hour, I have good news. You can hang out here for a whole hour if you want. These are always put on replay back in the Mastering Encompass community. So if you're kind of watching this now and you want to replay it again, that's fantastic. If you want to stay for a little hour, that's great too. It is a community event. So that means that as you have any questions, go ahead and use the chat in there over on the right-hand side. And if you are just joining us for the very first time, we have these meetings every other Tuesday now. And I want to make sure that we're bringing topics, things that are important to really discuss each and every event. It's not just meant to be a filler. It's also not really meant for you to kind of figure out what you want to talk about. But I do want you to ask questions. They can be on topic, preferably. But as we have time, the reason why I want to do this for an hour is because sometimes you want to talk about some other stuff that we're not really covering today. So there's always open time for Q&A. Today's topic is all about getting your personas and user groups aligned with your company properly. And I had Luba's like, I have a question, not on topic if we have time. Absolutely, Luba. I'll say like sometime in the next 35-ish minutes. Definitely make sure you don't let me forget about that, please. Pester me. Do whatever you got to do. So a couple things. First of all, let's go ahead and admit Jesse and whoever else needs to get here. As always, this is a free and open and fair community. So that means no matter who you work for, Jesse works for Lender Toolkit. I love having Jesse here. Jesse and I have known each other for a very long time. And so please pass it along. If you know somebody who doesn't get to these meetings every other Tuesday, get their butts over here. Same thing with Mastering Encompass. It's an open community. So if you know anybody who wants to learn more about mastering the Encompass platform, it's not just the settings, and it's certainly always changing. I have some important updates to share with you with regards to 25.1 that are coming out. We've got some updates talking about the ICE Mortgage Technology Conference. We've got huge updates happening to the Mastering Encompass community. And so we'll kind of get started here today. For those that are just joining, today's topic again is getting your personas and user groups aligned with your company properly. Cool. All right. So let's talk about personas. And again, I keep the mics off just because it gets to be too much with background noise. If anytime you want to come up and ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get you your mic turned on, that kind of a thing. Show of hands in the chat, whatever you want, but who's got any user accounts with more than one persona? All right. If you're not raising your hand, I'd probably say you're lying. So just a couple. Luba's being kind. I can tell you that the most egregious offender in Encompass administration with multiple personas are super administrators. Now, I go here right away because it's easy, right? You might be thinking, oh, well, he's going to talk about personas of like processors and, having a processor persona, an underwriter persona, and a closer persona. Yeah, that's a real thing. But let's remember, I'm going to bring it up on screen here in a minute, but let's remember what a persona is, right? A persona is all about making sure that you are only going through your job function. And the job function in this particular case has to do with the the ins and outs of what they're supposed to be doing. A persona is a list of things that they're allowed to do, aka job function. What it is not, it's not actually the name. And I've said this publicly a long time. ICE really dropped the ball. And I can't blame them. It's 2004, and they're coming up with this brand new thing called personas. And they're like, well, what do we do? And we'll go, oh, we got loan officers and processors and underwriters, et cetera. So we'll just call personas that. And what ends up happening is people start to think about, well, we've got loan officers, we've got loan officer assistants, we've got senior processors, we've got closers with exception authority and loan officers with no pricing. I mean, you name it, right? And so what ends up happening here is in an average Encompass environment, I'm going to bring up my Encompass on screen here just to kind of give you some perspective on screen. But in an average Compass environment, what ends up happening, historically speaking, is you end up with this multiple persona syndrome. Yes, that's a thing. If you've never heard that before, now you have. And basically, what it means is if you go down in your system administration and you go into all user information and you go on personas and you click it and you end up with something like this dude, like what the hell is he doing? Having the job function of a super administrator means that they are doing typically system administration stuff, right? But let's remember, a super administrator is not even a persona to begin with. It's yes, it is a persona, but you can't choose it from the persona list because it can do whatever it wants. And so when you look at things like loan officer, processor, underwriter, closer, funder, post-closure, you're probably thinking of a person. You're probably thinking of a position in a company. And what I want to brainwash you right now is, what if that said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Would that change your mind? A lot of times I equate this to other things that we come across in administration, like conditions. And if we think of condition codes, or even better, if you're going through all of these things, you might even think of user groups, those kinds of things. And so when we look at personas, one of the things that I tend to focus in on is when you have a long list of personas to choose from, you tend to choose a lot. And for those that are still raising their hands, Katie, Angie, and Kevin, let me know if you have a question or not. Let's see what the questions are here. So Libby says, but we do this for things like pipelines and admins. You want to see pipelines for users, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I get you, Luba. So I'm going to talk about this, personas in particular. When you find as an administrator, when you find you're falling into the trap that Luba describes, which is you need to create a persona so that you can see something along those lines. I want you to, which is what she was responding to, was to why give yourself all those personas. Again, you're a bit of an exception because you don't have to worry about business rules as a super administrator. And so what we're worried about is if you give somebody multiple personas, we know that we've got persona access to fields and persona access to loans, business rules, where Encompass gets really stupid and we don't really know what it's seeing. And if you haven't experienced this yet, congratulations, you're lucky. The reality is that most people, when they come into Encompass and you've got multiple personas, you're typically only going to hear when they can't do something. You never hear when they can do something they're not supposed to. And that's really what's happening here with these persona access business rules. You've got that. The other thing that a lot of people don't talk about when you've got multiple personas is roles. And so a role is an aggregation of personas and or user groups. And so when you get into this situation, if you've got multiple personas, that means you also have multiple roles. Why does that matter? Glad you asked. Because when you get into role access documents, if you have this checkbox checked, which hopefully you do, it means that these role access to documents business rules are firing even if the name is not in the file under that role because you checked the box. So when I go through like the Mastering Encompass admin course, right, this is the kind of stuff that I teach. I teach how everything is interconnected and how everything is interlocked. And if you make one move over here, it's probably going to have a butterfly effect somewhere else. And so the reason why this is important to understand your personas and the way that they're configured for job function is because you want to make sure that you're looking at these lists of capabilities as it relates to what they need to do. Another pause for a second. Show of hands for me, because everybody's got their hands down now. So thank you. Show of hands, who has their workflow documented, even if it's a little old? And when I say a little old, I mean maybe 2 years at most. Workflow documented. And so the reason why I asked this question, so we got 5 people-ish out of 50. It's actually a pretty good number. I was expecting much less. Maybe some of you work at the same company. So the idea of, as an admin, how can you possibly know what somebody's job function is if you don't know the workflow? And again, you might think you know, but unless you actually have the workflow documented, you probably don't. And so where I'm going with this is, and Catherine, Carrie, and Patty, thanks for letting us know about your workflow documentation status. When you go through all of these tabs, right, and there's a lot of settings to worry about for each persona. Maintenance is something I'm always worried about. And when you get into each one of these, if you've got more than one persona assigned to one person, a classic example could be a loan officer assistant, or a senior processor, regular loan processor. And there's these concepts I want to talk about today that are just defunct. And if you've got it in your system, I want you to really work on getting it out of your system. The first one that I came across again recently when we took over settings, a full Encompass support team, like with admins and help desk and everything, was they had an all users persona. This concept I saw for the first time about 12 years ago, maybe 10 at the very least. And it was this idea that I'm going to give everybody the same set of job functions inside of Encompass, and that's going to save me a lot of maintenance clicks down the road. It's a complete hogwash. Candace is passed out on the floor now. It's okay, Candace, you can get up. It's all right. Everybody's going to be fine. But the idea is somebody thought it was a good idea to give everybody the same level of job function, and that's just not true, right? We know it's not true. And every time Encompass gets updated, it even becomes less and less true. Specifically when it gets involved with who can do what in the E folder. Obviously, if you involve a protected docs workflow, that's going to cause a lot of problems. Now that we're getting into enhanced conditions for a lot of folks, that could get problematic with multiple personas. Because it's important to remember that when you're dealing with personas, just like user groups and everything else up in this company user setup, it's an aggregated yes. So that means if anybody has one of those personas, they have every setting that's here. So as an admin, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you really, really deal with it? And I'll give you just a good, quick story of, I walked into an engagement about 2 years ago now. Still there, still working. And I'm not exaggerating, we had about 50 personas. And it was extraordinarily common for when we went to the all user information, I had to go about like this because I had people with all different kinds of stuff. And so what do you do? What do you do to align this with your company properly? And what I did was I started with the things that I knew were probably most similar. And then I worked into that to get to the business to say, does this person who does this job really need this in their job function list? I don't use the word persona, A, because people misunderstand what that word means, but B, when I say, what are they supposed to be doing for their job? It's really simple. Like, people tend to get it. So what I do is I go over settings report, and I'll go and run settings report, and I'll run it at the persona level, right? Hopefully you guys know how to do this. And I pick the personas that I want to look at combining. I select all, and then I run it. And when you run that, download the report and all, you can see it in an Excel format, and you can start to look for the fields that are different. Because remember, if the person has both personas, they get the aggregated yes. So when they're in alignment, everything's cool. The only thing I'm looking for is the exceptions. Right? Does that make sense, everybody? Right? You're always looking for the exceptions. And guys, unless you're leaving your company like, I don't know, this month or this quarter or something, this work is going to be there for a while. And so, as you go through your company, I'm not necessarily worried about this list. I'm worried about the all user information, and I'm worried about this list. Again, so let's hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go back through some of the notes in this now, and I'm going to go back to a couple of people gave it a thumbs up for the pipeline views as an admin, right? And so you give yourself that view to as to test that user to see the view. If you're doing that and you're kind of all by yourself and you're doing it real quick, again, that's okay, right? It's not the end of the world. Let's not be like perfect here. Let's just try to get to better. And I'm not so worried about super administrators. What I am worried about is when I've got a loan officer, a processor, et cetera, and they've got multiple personas. And I'm not making this up. I saw one 2 days ago where it was loan officer, processor, and underwriter. And I'm like, all right, well, what aren't they supposed to be doing? And so when we go through that situation, I like to try to bring the business back into using the settings reports to help them understand. Rob, did you have a question? I don't get your hand raised. I don't know if that's for my question or if you actually have a question you want to come up on stage, let me know and ask. Okay, Carrie asks a good question. Okay, Robbie, thanks. So terminated, I've seen this too, where terminated persona, disabled persona, all perfectly acceptable, perfectly fine. And I advocate for it, truthfully, because it relieves the risk of somebody being into doing something that we don't know that they're doing. Now, how can that happen? Trust me, it happens. So when you go and you create your personas, you can, if you want to use this methodology of creating a terminated or disabled user, I prefer disabled. There is terminated here, whatever. So what I do is you come in and you create a new persona, access to no features, and just call it disabled, right? And so when you add this in, yes, you'd go into the user account, and we'd want to make sure, if I can click on the right one here, we'd go in. I don't know if I have any test users down here. So you'd come into here. If I got rid of this lock desk user, I'd come in, I'd remove that, and I'd go and mark disabled and be done wherever I put that right there. And that's the way it would look. So Carrie asks, do you use folder in your hierarchy? I'm going to talk about that in a second, because that's tied into, again, or user management, and I want to talk about that when we get to user groups. Carrie asks, does this cause any issue with prior loan assignments? Persona does not cause issue with prior loan assignments. But if we deal with user groups, which we're talking about next, that can cause loan visibility issues if it's not configured properly. So Sean asks, if you have a small organization where someone is say, a processor and a closer, but you want to have the persona split up easily, split that feature across multiple individuals, are you saying that's not good? Absolutely, Sean. Now, if you have a temporary, right, so there's always exceptions. So if you have your processor who's temporarily covering a closer and they've got the skill sets and the responsibilities to do the job function of the closer temporarily, give them both, and it is what it is. Set a timer and make sure you don't forget to unwind it. But 1000%, if you've got a person whose job function is to process and close, whatever that means for your company, Sean, one persona, especially with those two roles, because I want to make sure that when I come down into persona access to loans business rules, that I don't give the persona of processor the ability to edit files that have been closed. Like, why would you do that? So Luba says we actually now have users with 2 different user IDs that they do 2 different jobs. To which I say that's kind of, for me, that's a waste. Even if you have unlimited seats now, it's still a waste. It's a waste because you're now tracking 2 different IDs for the same person. What happens if it becomes they get another job, Luba? You're going to give them 3 IDs? So the idea is what I always, the answer is no, Luba, you don't do that. So the idea is make sure that you understand what the person's permanent job function is. So I'm going to go back to Sean's example. Let's say the business came to you and said, hey, listen, we're going to implement a QC team. And Larry is going to be head of the QC team. But they're also going to process and underwrite too. What are you going to do with that? And the correct answer is you're going to create a new persona that might even just say Larry on here, like special, Larry special, because no one else is ever going to need that persona. That's kind of where I'm headed with this. For Sean and for anybody else listening, the idea is to make sure you know what you're doing from a planning perspective. Is it temporary or is it permanent? Angie asks, should you delete personas that are no longer in use? The answer is no. You should create a do not use below this line and keep it. Remember, Encompass is a database. And if you've ever had a user with that persona because you've had it for a little bit, please don't delete it ever because you don't want to lose that data. Lynn says, oh, Lynn's talking about SSO. Yeah, it'll definitely cause a problem with SSO because you can only have one user ID in your exchange to match up with your SSO. So thank you, Lynn. Yeah, Luba, what Lynn said. All right. So I think I've got all the questions in here about personas. Again, I want you to take away one important conversation about this. Number one, you are not the only company that has multiple persona problems. Not even close. Everybody on this call's got it, guaranteed. And sometimes it's on purpose and sometimes it's not. And what I want you to really think about is somebody able to do something that they're not supposed to do? Is somebody seeing things that they're not supposed to see? How are you going to make sure if you want somebody to be able to access Encompass Web at some point this year, that not everybody can get to that? How are you going to deal with web version customizations that you want to be allowed to only be seen by certain personas, but not the other person? So that when they get to their web UI, they're not confused based upon the training you've given them. All of these things, guys. Again, butterfly effect, right? Alex says, what about a user that is more of a unicorn? Do you still recommend creating a persona around the job function rather than modify the individual's rights? Oh, gosh. So what we're talking about here with Alex is if we go in and break the persona, please don't do that unless you know exactly what you're doing and you have that documented and you set a timer and an alert and a piece of paper on your forehead so you don't forget that you did it. We're talking about this. You can't report on this, and it's easily forgotten about. And God forbid you want to move on from your job, you're leaving your company. Alex leaves comments in the user's account, perfectly great. Hope everybody reads that. And again, you can't report on it. So when you're doing a thing, and you're trying to figure out why did somebody do something, why did Lockdesk have that thing, you got to remember to come in here to read the comments because you're not going to be able to see it. Okay. So to answer your question, if you have somebody who's a unicorn, give them the unicorn persona. You got to know what they're doing. They have to have their job functions documented. Give them exactly what they need to do and be done with it. Now, again, butterfly effect. That's going to affect your roles. That's going to affect every single persona-based business role you have. Plus, if you've written VB.NET code that calls into persona contains, you got to worry about that too. So the reality is you're going to have to manage this one way or another. What I'm trying to guide you on is scaling and maintenance. The less you have, the easier it is to scale and the easier it is to create maintenance. Just telling you, 20 years of using Encompass, it always comes down to maintenance. And so Carrie says, what about managers? It seems managers a bit different. How is their job function different? That's what I'm asking you, Carrie. In other words, they're a bit different. Well, accessing different loans or they actually have different job functions? That would be the question. Lynn says other pain point is people job description. Again, not the. So if you equate job description to job function, I would challenge that. I would challenge that. A good example is senior loan processor, senior underwriter, branch manager, loan officer assistant. I guarantee in the proper workflow, the LOA has the same job function as a loan officer. They just don't have the license. Same thing with branch manager. Branch manager might have all the responsibilities to do the job of a loan officer and processor and LOA. They just don't have a license for that. So you got to make sure you understand job function. I don't worry about job title. I'll hear that all the time. Well, so-and-so's got a job title. I'm like, I don't care. What do they do all day? What do they have to do in Encompass? That's what I care about. Hopefully that makes sense. And yes, I am. That's how I talk to people. Because if you don't find out the reality, you can't figure out your life. And you got to figure out your life in here. The only one I have is to allow, more power and disclosure tracking. Well, then that's a job function. And there you go. Carrie says, I was trying to get away with having to add the reports persona to a bunch of people. So Carrie's using a reports persona because Carrie wants to do another version of the all users persona. You got to stop. Like, you just have to stop. If somebody's supposed to have access to the reports tab, then give them the access to the reports tab. If they're not, then take it away. But please don't try to shortcut. You're only going to create maintenance problems for yourself. You're only going to create business rules problems for yourself. That's my summary, guys. And it's clear, from this group, just like every other time I meet with large groups and small companies, that to that matter, this kind of a thing is misunderstood, and it's really hard to get your head around because of all the prior settings that you've managed and all the prior experience that you've earned. But what I will tell you that if you want to plan for the next 5 years for your company, get this on the agenda. Start with 2 personas that multiple people have and combine them, and then keep working. The sooner you start, the sooner you're finished, but you got to start. That's my guidance for you today. All right. Okay. Who knew you could talk about personas for half an hour, right? All right. Let's get into user groups, which is the other part of this, and kind of that ties into organization users. So somewhere earlier in the chat, somebody said something about being able to see the loans or something like that. And when I get into an environment of, it was about the disabled, being able to see, and I said, that's really a user group thing. If you have your organizational hierarchy like this is out of the box, right? And so if we wanted processors in branch A to see loans from loan officer in branch B1, can they natively see that? The correct answer is no, right? Candace gets the prize. She went into chat and said no. So how do you manage that? The correct answer is user groups, right? We come over in a user group and we say, hey, we create a user group, and we say members in that branch can see the loans of these folks, and can they edit it, and which loan folders. I can tell you hands down that there's plenty of people on this call that do not have their user groups and the organizational hierarchy properly configured. And here's how you test it. Take somebody who is a producing person who's down somewhere like in a branch level, and move them into a temp folder, and watch how many people scream that those loans just disappeared. And the reason, and that's the reason why I use that kind of a test, is because typically people will use hierarchy to default how loans are seen. And this is one of the biggest errors that happen in user group configuration in companies that I see, and I do workflow reviews and support on. And so what ends up happening is you end up in this tailspin of putting people in organizational folders just so somebody that's either at the same level or in levels above them can see those loans. If you have that happening in your Encompass, if you hear the connection of that sentence anywhere in your organization, past or present, you have a user group problem. So Luba asks, what about the setting and user group details? This is access loans in the same level. Stop using it. Like, I know it's easy, right? And so if we go into branch B and I create a user in here, Angie, I'll repeat it in a second. If I use this and I do this, it's a false sense of a setting. It's easy. It's easy because why wouldn't you use it? It's right here. The problem is that if I create a user in branch B, I'm always going to have them see loans in branch B1. But what if something changes? In other words, what if I go in and I want now this processor, I'll pick on processors. This processor, I don't want them to see all the loan officer's loans here. I only want to see some of them. You can't do that. So Angie, to say this again, when you go through organizational hierarchy, lots of companies tend to put users in strategic places so that they can see the loans of their subordinates. And that is a fallacy and that is wrong. So what you're listening for in your organization is we're intentionally organizing users in a meaningful way so that they can see loans. And you know you have a problem when you hear something like, hey, we can't move somebody out of a folder and put them into disabled, because if they do, then so and so can't see their loans. Candace, there's no such thing as too many user groups, because just like in personas, you need what you have to have. How do you know how many user groups you need? Well, it depends on your workflow. I'll come back to all users in a second, because I'm going to make sure you know specific information about this. But when you're getting into user groups, you can literally create a user group for your single person or an entire branch. It all depends on what members you want to include in that, whose loans they should see, if any, as well as which loan folders of those users. Should they be able to edit all the borrower contacts? What resources are they supposed to have and templates, as well as custom print forms and reports and dashboard views, etc. And then last but not least, this is again one of those things that are completely usually missed, is which out of these people in the members tab, who should they see when they go to click the role in the milestone templates? And the reason, listen, Candace just says, in the comments here, ICE recommends no more than 30 in user groups. That's realistic for most companies. But again, if you have, I'll give you a good example. If you have a company that's got 75 different branches, and your policy is to give that branch a custom print form that's uniquely different, that can't be modified through strategic merge fill code, it's actually just a different document. What are you going to do? So 30 is not, 30 is an arbitrary number. The correct answer is you use as many user groups as you need to satisfy your organizational flow. And so Sean says, what's the perfect setup? I just gave that answer. The correct setup is whatever you need to support your workflow. Workflow comes first. And so user groups are how we manage your loan officer, assistant loan access. Luba says that, and that's correct. John says, I'm so glad someone else has said it, because it seemed like we have so many user groups and I'm not sure how to do it any other way. What you want to make sure is that, again, from a maintenance perspective, you're only using a user group for one of a few reasons. The first reason why you need a user group to be unique is because you need to make sure the members of that user group only see certain people in that role. A good example would be if you want your processors to submit to a queue user, you'd have to have a user group that contains all your processors, so that when you come down to the underwriter, they see some and you pick your queue user, right? And that's the way you do it. And make sure that, of course, if you use a queue user, I know it doesn't say that here, but make sure you uncheck this, and that's the way you can use an inactive account as a queue user within your workflow. Again, pretend this as processors, right? And then, of course, with the underwriters user group, you would flip this, check the box, and the underwriters user group would see all underwriters, assuming that's what they were supposed to do, so they could self-assign or do whatever it is. Candace asks, would you put processors in their own folder and use organization group to grant access, or would you stick to hierarchy? No, the correct answer is user group. So what I would do is I would come into create a user group, and I would create one for processors, right? So within this processor, now you might have certain groups of processors, so maybe you need more than one, but you pick your members. So in here, I'm always going to go with organizational folder to make sure that it makes sense. So let's pretend it's this one. I'm usually going to add this in children just in case I do subfolders later on. And then I'm going to make sure that they access the appropriate number of loans. So does anyone have anybody who's a super admin, but also a producing loan officer or creates loans, right? Sometimes you have to go by administration and children. Other times you don't. You just have to know which loans this processor member group should be able to see. So let's pretend that they're only supposed to see this branch B1. Make sure they can edit it, make sure that those loans are only the ones that they're supposed to see. So maybe they're just supposed to see pipeline. Well, anytime that you create a new user group, when you come over into templates and resources, they're going to be blank. So there's not much to really worry about risk-wise, but you always have to remember that the role list view will always default to all. So if you go and create a new user group and you worked your butt off to make sure that these were correct for like other user groups, you have to go through each one of these roles for every user group that you create, so your members see the correct people when they click the lookup tool in the milestone worksheet. Okay, or if it's a non-role, if it's a non-milestone role, over in the file context tool. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, I'm going to talk about the all users here. If you go through your all users user group right now, yeah, and so John beat me to the punch here. John stole my thunder, which is awesome. I love it. The all users user group is always everyone. You can never take that away. So what I always tell people in my workflow, in my settings reviews that I do, I go to the only one I go to besides I go to processors. This one, processors, underwriters, typically, just as a sense. No, dude, no, John, I'm glad you said this because it's not just me, right? It's going to include everybody. I'm always coming in here, making sure this is empty, making sure these are unchecked. I go to borrower contacts, make sure this is unchecked because I don't want people being able to just arbitrarily get to the borrower contacts tab. I want to make sure that these are empty. So by design, I want to make sure this is gone. I don't want everybody being able to get to everything. Same thing with resources. I go through, and yes, it's a pain in the ass, but you got to go through, and you can. The good news is you can multi-select this guy. I lied. You have to do one at a time. I thought one of them you could multi-select. So you go through and just remove them. And yes, it's a pain in the ass, but you do it once and it's done. And then lastly, on the role list view, I come over here and I do sum. I do sum, and I do sum, and I leave it blank. The reason why is because I can't control this in the future if I don't start at scratch. And so John has a user group that everything is shut off, and that's the one we use to create new user groups. Because if you come in here and create a new user group, like I said, it'll make the role list view full again, which can be annoying if you have a lot of roles. Or if you go through, no, I don't. If you go through, you can just come over here and cancel, and highlight it so it's blue, and then click the duplicate up here. Okay. So here's the takeaway with the user groups that I wanted to really drive home. Number one, to me, just like in personas, you need to make sure you have the appropriate number of user groups to what you need to accomplish. In the middle of that sentence, without saying it out loud, is your organizational hierarchy setup. If you've got the situation where you have created a hierarchy of folders intentionally to serve up loan files and not for what they're actually used for, you need to look at your process and think about your user groups. What were these developed for? What were these used for? When you go in and edit this organization, the reason why you have the ability to make this address not follow the parent is because from a licensing perspective, this was meant to be a different address than the main company. So these are really meant to be groups of users. This used to say organizational hierarchy. For whatever reason, Ellie Mae Ice changed it. And now it's just organization/users. What I usually tell people in our engagements is this should mimic your IT team. This should mimic what you have set up in your organization for your IT users. Group your processors together, group your underwriters together, group your loan officers together, group your physical branches that actually have a different location together, group your executives together. As a reminder, the only ones you should ever have in the top folder are super administrators. If you have more people up there, it's another telltale sign that your user groups are not configured properly. If you put somebody up there because they need to see all the loans, get them out. Service accounts do not need to be up here. No, 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 no. As a matter of fact, at Canvas, service accounts should be in their own organizational folder here, because you're going to use what to make sure they get to the right loans and can edit the right loans. You're going to use user groups. Same trap, Candace. Do not put service accounts. Service accounts are not super administrators. They're not. Okay. So takeaways. Personas or job functions. Treat them like that. User groups are a way to make sure you serve resources. I always tell people resources, user group, resources, user group, resources. That's my brainwashing technique. And then, of course, organize your organizational / users, your folders, to be as vertical as possible. This is ideal. And make sure you're grouping people together appropriately. All right, so Sean says he's got a friend who has an all users user group that's incorrectly set up, and then maybe the friend needs to first create each new user group and then go back and remove all the permissions in the all users group. Yeah, I think if we wanted to come back in here and we wanted to unwind some excess risk, the correct way to do it is you want to build what you need first, put them where they need to go, and then pull the cord. Okay, that would be the same with personas. If you need to go in and create a new persona for the 2 personas you're going to retire, you're going to build a new persona, assign that to the user, and then pull the 2 out, right? Because they have to have something. So, yeah. Okay, so good. First of all, this is information. The reason why I picked this topic at this time of year is because you're not alone. These are topics I've been teaching for I've been implementing Encompass now professionally for 13 years. This is how I configure an implementation, right? So like right now, we just signed up a new company. We're doing a retail implementation. They're currently all TPO. And we're doing a retail implementation. I'm digging first into personas, organizational hierarchy, and user groups, and milestones for that matter. I'm going through up here first because I got to get this thing in line before I bring in a new channel. All right, so let's see. John says when we terminate, we move the users to a disabled folder. Then the management and the branch can no longer see their loans. User group. So Jamie, when you go through, again, what's happening here is the branch management can no longer see their loans, and in terms of having access to those loans, I'm presuming that the branch manager's name's not in the file, which is why they lose access. So what you might end up doing in your particular case for your branch is, instead of tying the user group to the loans of the branch, tie it to the individuals for the branch. And the reason why I say that is because regardless of where that user goes, they'll always be able to see that loan. That'll probably help you, Jamie. Hopefully everybody gets that, right? If here, the problem is here, if the user leaves that org folder, it's gone. The cutout, the members can no longer see that loan. But if the loan is tied to that lock desk user, regardless of where that lock desk user is in the org hierarchy, you'll be able to see it. Renee says, perfect. Adding granted access resource loan templates to the correct user group and remove access. Yep, perfect. Go for it. Candace says, I've always wanted to put groups of users in separate folders in the hierarchy, but can never decide. That's the way I should do it because of the supposed best practice on user group number. Nah, Candace. No. Nope. Candace, do what you know is right. Do what you know you want to do. I don't know, again, I don't know where that best practice came from, whatever. Angie asks, can we delete user groups that are no longer needed? Again, you could theoretically maybe be okay, possibly. I don't like deleting anything that's already been used. I create, just like you saw in personas, you can create a new user group that says do not use below this line. If I could type, I swear it'd be better. Right, so that's going to go over here. And then if you want to have just, if you want to go through, it's going to auto, I think it does auto, right? If we go out, it auto assigns it. So maybe, I don't think that's going to work. Yeah. I don't know. It goes in the D's. It doesn't pay attention. So forget that crap. Maybe you put do not use. I think maybe I've done that. I'm trying to remember what I did to solve for that problem. I think I said not in use or not current or do not use, something like that. But I don't like deleting anything in Encompass that's been used. Yeah, people use ZZs. There you go. Thanks, guys. User groups are alpha. Yeah, I know. I just realized that. Thanks, Candace. We've used TPO, but can no longer trying to clean up. Oh, you used to have TPO. Yeah, Angie. Yeah, maybe you use Z, like people are saying. Use a Z. There you go. Looks like everybody uses a Z. Group choice. All right. Luba, what's your question? Jesse says, be careful with renaming because some things are not built. I don't know, Jesse, you're typing. Oh, GUID mapped. Yeah, so again, Jesse's a developer. So he's got a developer brain, which is great. It's definitely something you want on your team if you can afford it. The idea here is that there, from a plugin program perspective, API perspective, if you've got user groups in there, special characters could cause an issue or whatever. Just as Jesse said, if you're renaming things, just be mindful of looking for problems not long after you make a change. So I think it's just an extra call out for good change management. Make sure your teams are involved, and especially if you're using anything in your platform that leverages user groups in terms of code or extra third-party developer programs or your own developer programs, just make sure everybody knows what you're doing before you do it. Good call out, Jesse. Thank you. So Luba says, I just figured out that if you fill in the field 1041, then go to VA loan summary and look at, which is the same. Oh, I'm trying to read your question, Luba. So Luba wants a group answer. Luba says she's noticing on field 1041, you look at field under number 24, which I guess is line 24. Should I go into a file, Luba? Just tell me where to go. Yes. Okay, let me go into a file for Luba here. We'll go into, does it matter? I'll just go into this guy. Tell me where to go. Renaming user groups should be okay. I do this quite often. Again, Candace, I think it's just important to really decide. For Mickey, I think for anything, anytime you're using special characters, be careful. Encompass doesn't like special characters always. I would certainly, again, sometimes argue against them, especially user groups, personas. It just gets weird sometimes. Where do you want me to go, Libet? What input form, please? Or what tool? So we noticed that 1041 would clear out randomly. We have no rule set up for any kind. URLA lender. Okay, so and we go to number 24. Where? I have no idea where you mean. You have to should field 1041. Fill in to field 1041. Yeah, you're gonna have to guide me on that one, Luba. Somebody else want to know where 1041 is? I'm gonna do a control G real quick. Good news is if you do, well, of course now it's gonna take me through all these fields. Oh my God. I know URLA lender. I'm gonna get there. Tell me where in the form, Carrie, please. Sorry, this thing is a mess. URLA lender 1003 URLA lender. Property info. Thank you. Property info. Maybe not. Okay. Oh, now you're killing everybody here. I'd say, Luba, let's take it on the community. If anybody knows, if reads the chats, property type below attachment type. But so that was up here, I thought, right? Property type below attachment type. That guy? Okay. So 1041 is different from 1053. 1053 is on the 1008 to use lots of tens here. So Luba, if you're seeing now go to VA loan summary, yeah. So if you're looking at field 1041 on here and you're seeing that on the VA loan summary, that's where you were saying number 24, right? On the VA loan summary. Okay. This guy. I gotcha. And we go to number 24 and we're seeing that that's field 1041. What I want you to pay attention to is there's obviously some back-end code that's limiting this property type list from the other. They have different menu options, and we know how that happens through field data entry rules. So yeah, so I would say that you'd want to actually see if there's any information on the Resource Center or from ICE on how best to manage that. But this is definitely a field modification happening on the input form from ICE, from Encompass. Yeah, and Jesse confirmed that's not an FDE rule. I don't have any FDE rule for field 1041, so I know it's not. Right, this is my environment, and there ain't nothing in here. So it's definitely native, and I would check with ICE for best practice if you're looking for it. You got it, Luba. Thanks for that question. All right, so a couple things happening here. I just want to make sure everybody's aware. Again, the wrap-up show, if you're headed to ICE, if you know somebody going to ICE and they can stay one extra day, we have about 15 spots or less, maybe a little bit less than that right now, for the wrap-up show. It's basically a full day of workshops, going through a lot of this. You're going to have your Encompass up. We're going to be going through settings. I'm going to be teaching you how to use Encompass Web and what we've been successful with on everything on those settings and automations and some best practices, et cetera, et cetera. It's 8 hours of fun, food. Apparently, we're playing Pokemon Go. So I don't know. We're going to be having a lot of fun there. It's going to be in the casino in Petrus 2, I believe. And it's from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Still $500. That's going to go to $750 in February. And there you go. There's that. The next time we get together is going to be in February. And so that's going to be all about how and why we move to enhanced conditions. I'm going to talk to you about what works, what doesn't work, and also just a regurgitation of my meeting today with a live company and how I helped those processors and underwriters feel good. So they tell me about moving to enhanced conditions. So I feel that information is probably going to be helpful for you. And if you have any interest in helping me grow the community and so we have an affiliate program for Mastering Encompass for admins. If you're interested in finding out more about that, let me know. And that's all I got for today. More questions, open time. Yeah, we're going to play. Katie says she can't wait, by the way, for her to play Pokemon Go in Vegas. That's really what she cares about. She hears there's lots of shinies in the win. Shiny's a Pokemon term. Anyway, that's all we have. All right, no open questions. I drained the cup. Drain the glass. Any virtual seats available for day after class? I can't promise that, Patty, but I am going to work my ass off to get the whole day recorded and split up and put into something that other people can use. I tried that before and it sucked, so I didn't actually release it. It was really bad. Everybody pray for Angie's budget to get approved. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. And all right, last thing I will say is we've got our native iOS and native Google app submitted to the Apple Store and the Google Play Store for Mastering Encompass, its own native app. Why is that a big deal? It's just because you can get stuff in your phone instead of having to go to a website. I know for some folks, the website isn't always behaving properly on their phone. So, we'll have that at your fingertips as soon as possible. We'll make announcements. And if anybody has a lead for and there'll be an Android app too, Luba, that's submitted. We'll probably get Android approved before Apple, the way Google goes. If anybody knows of any good jobs open, let Jamie know. She's got a LinkedIn profile in there, so shout out to Jamie. John says, any word yet? I'll be able to sign up for sessions. Oh, I totally forgot. So sessions should be open for registration supposedly next week. We'll see. I am speaking. They're telling me Tuesday morning on the session that I'm doing for native automation. So that's happening. And the other piece that's happening is with regards to 25.1. 25.1 is going to include for multi-user enablement for API interaction. We already have this, gang. If you've got EPC, Optimal Blue for using EPC, you already have multi-user enabled, but you just don't realize it. So you're going to be hearing a lot about this for 25.1. 25.1's date, Jesse, we're being told is sometime late February, just in time to give us at least a week before the show. But you know how these things go. I'm sure it'll be like the day of the show, right? Chris says, how fast do those tend to fill up? Like if I'm not at my computer, when do they open and miss the top choices? Dude, your guess is as good as mine. And they do fill up fast. It's like as good as getting tickets to the Sphere. It's hard. It's hard, or Ticketmaster. It's not as bad as a Swift concert, but in any event, it is tough and tight. So have you heard if there's an admin track? All the tracks are available. So if you go over into Ice Mortgage Technology, right, and you go over to register, oh man, the internet in my house, I've got to get, Candace says, I thought it was dropping to production March 18th. That would be nice if it was after it. And if you know something I don't know, that's great. I haven't heard any, I haven't gotten any updates. Jesse, obviously, and I are not on the cool kids thing. So the agenda tracks, oh wait, where are my sessions? I think it's under sessions. So those are the tracks right there. There's a fifth one down here, real estate. You guys aren't going to care about that. So I'm in this guy. I'm in originations. Yeah, so if production's 318, then test is usually a couple of weeks before. 24.3 was just an anomaly. So the one I'm doing is this guy, innovation included. That's all I got for today, gang. I'm going to go to a Flyers game if anybody wants to meet me there. You guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks as always for coming to these. Appreciate your time and your feedback, and make it a great day. See you now.